Welcome to the Global Discussion, discussions with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. My name is Simon Hodgkins. It's a real pleasure today to be joined by Brittany Rincon. Brittany, you're very, very welcome to the show today. Let's begin by asking you to tell a little bit about yourself and all these new things that you're involved in, because it's a very exciting time that you're joining us. So over to you, Brittany.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here. And yes, the timing is impeccable because we are in the middle of a huge transition. So a little bit about myself. I actually have a history as an educator. I spent about 10 years in education as a teacher, as a vice principal. And I feel like I keep hearing this story more and more, but COVID changed everything. Right. So during COVID, I actually started a podcast and I met a lot of people online as guests, as friends, as colleagues. And eventually I started helping other people along that same journey. And that eventually grew into my very own production company. So the big transition that's happened in the last couple of months is I actually, partnered with someone who had a podcast network. And I had a podcast production company and we joined forces, which is now a Boundless audio network. And then as of January of this year, we acquired WOC Podcasters from Danielle, who started it about 6 years ago. And she was ready to kind of pass the torch on to someone else. And we acquired it and are kind of now thinking about, wow, a couple of months ago, we had one business each, and now we are running 3. And figuring out what that means in the future has been really exciting. And we have a great team behind us.
Well, listen, thank you for sharing that with our worldwide audience. And yeah, most people would just do one of those things, but you've got quite a lot going on now. So, COVID was a good time for many people to maybe try new things, do other things. And you kind of, as you said, you sort of launched this discussion podcast. But then all of a sudden it becomes Boundless Audio, doesn't it? And you have this full-fledged production company. And now we're post-acquisition now because you've taken on this new entity, and you're sort of working those together. How's that working in reality? Because it's very easy to say it, but is it chaos behind the scenes? Is it very organized? Is it, late nights and long hours? Or, have you got some really cool plans that you're working on? How's it all fitting together for you at the moment? Because there's a lot happening right now.
It's very day by day. I think the company that I had prior was a well-oiled machine. It was running for 3 years. I had a great team. Everyone knew their role. And, that was doing really well. But now, like you said, now to have 3 branches, what was once my production team is now handling each branch of the company. So some days it's super chaotic to kind of figure out what's going on. And some days things are rolling really smoothly. And I'm like, yeah, we did the right thing. And then some days I'm like, where do we go next? So we definitely sat down as a whole team and thought about like, what is that we want to do? But at the end of the day, like you mentioned, people just pick one. The reason we picked all 3 is because all 3 companies have the same mission, which is to amplify the voices of women, especially women of color and in marginalized communities. So all of these communities, all of these businesses have that same model. So we kind of think of it almost as the trifecta of podcasting. And we offer something to everyone, whether you're a beginner and a DIYer, all the way through professional production, sponsorship management, and things like that.
And you mentioned Daniela's name a little while ago, and Daniela's no stranger to this show. And, as kind of the person that was really carrying the initial torch for this women of color podcasters community, I suppose, global community at this stage. How did it come about, the acquisition? How did you decide this was something that you wanted to get closer to, something that maybe you could take even further now?
I definitely would not have done this by myself. And I think timing is everything. My co-founder, Sasha Willis, and I had just decided to merge our 2 companies a couple of months prior to Danielle letting the community know that, she was thinking about stepping away. And we had both been involved in WOC Podcasters since the beginning, really, since it was a Facebook group, through the community changes, through the ups and downs. We were big fans of Danielle and of the community, and we didn't want to see it go away. We knew how important it was. So we kind of looked at each other and we were like, timing is everything. And this is a sign. And we have each other. So like, let's just do this.
And so tell me then, obviously, it sounds on one hand you have the perfect vehicle because you have, as you said, the trifecta, you have all these great parts that are coming together. So is it, 1 + 1 + 1 = 4? Is that kind of where you're looking at this from? And what does the future look like? What are you hoping to achieve with this new entity, with these new elements to your companies as you look forward over the next year or so? What have you got any plans for that, or what's that look like for you, Brittany?
Definitely, definitely. I think, any person who has a production company will tell you there's only so many clients you could take on without deciding if you're going to grow or not. And when we look at our production company that we love very much, we love our clients, we are getting close to capacity and we have to make the decision, are we going to expand the team or are we going to now look at other ways? And when we think of our community, when we think of how many women of color podcasters are out there, most of us are still DIYing it. Most of us have full-time jobs. Most of us are really just learning the basics. And we realize that when we want to grow our community, that's really where we have to begin. And it's definitely an easier model for us to implement with a smaller team as well. So we can help more people, which is our mission, to amplify their voices. We're going to teach them what they need to know. We're going to be their, support team behind the scenes, and we're going to grow them through the entire process. So then that was really the catalyst on like which part of the business are we going to emphasize? So that's definitely been a big piece, is the community piece, and teaching them things that are just behind the scenes that no one wants to talk about. How does a smaller show monetize? How do you have those conversations with brands? We're giving them the tools.
And what does things like, because I know you launched something called the Podcaster's Digest as well, right? So
Mhm.
is that helping you to grow that community? Is that sort of a vehicle to help share this knowledge? Because you're right, it's on one hand you've got Joe Rogan and Gary Vaynerchuk and the big sponsorship money floating around. On the other hand, you've got an awful lot of really creative sort of indie type podcasters out there who maybe aren't pulling together that sponsorship deal or aren't getting that sort of um, revenue stream that they need to keep going with this. What I suppose, well, for many starts as a passion project.
Yes. And, statistically looking at it, podcast, ad spend does not go to marginalized communities. So we're really working hard to change that narrative and giving educating our community, but also creating systems that will work for them. So, we're partnering with a lot of other organizations in this field to get better analytics, to band together, to realize that, it's not just our community. There are several other communities in this space. We have Black Podcasters Association. We're partnering with them, and we're really just thinking about, how do we change the system as opposed to just looking at it one-sided. So that's been a huge piece of it. Another piece of it is, we all look at podcasting awards, right? And there's a very large entry fee that goes along with some of those awards. So in our network, for our network members, we will pay for them to enter one award per season, which is unheard of in some networks of our size. But again, our mission is to amplify their voices. And our goal is to grow the network so we have at least 2 shows in every single category so that we see more people like us winning these awards. And it's not being, behind the idea of just the buy-in, because it's very challenging for smaller shows to enter these award seasons.
It's interesting. I was talking to a podcast community out in Asia Pacific not too long ago. And one of the key challenges or one of the frustrations that they find is that a lot of the awards programs for podcast type content, it's the same people winning the same awards year in and year out. And as you say, it costs money to enter, it costs time to enter, and they don't really win at all. Not because the content isn't good, but because they're not pulling in maybe the same amount of downloads or listenerships, or they don't have that large corporate support. And do you think we're seeing a change in that, or is it as bad, or is it getting worse? And do you feel that by investing in people, which is what you're actually doing, and getting their voice heard, are you hoping to start turning that discussion?
100%. I think as a judge for many award shows, right? So I've judged for Signal Awards, the Webby Awards. I see what's coming in. I see as a judge of podcasters shows in different categories and how a lot of the shows sound very similar or have been around for a certain amount of time, and how often do we see some of these smaller shows come through in front of us to judge, right? So that information, that experience, I'm taking back to my network and talking to our people and saying, look, here's how this actually works from behind the scenes. Here's how, we need to position ourselves in order to even, stand out amongst somebody else. Because honestly, there's so much out there. A lot of podcast content is very, very similar, right? It's very similar. So what is it that's going to make us stand out? Well, it's our stories, it's our experiences, because that's not what's out there already. And I think it's a little bit of both. I think a lot of things have just become a little bit more corporate, I think, in the podcasting world since COVID and since all of the big money went behind it, about 2 years ago now. And people are thinking it's dying. It's definitely not dying at all. It's just that it's evolving again. And how do we evolve with the times as opposed to keep trying to do the same thing we've always done?
Yeah, and you've mentioned obviously the marginalized communities aspect of that, and it seems just as an observer that the large corporate checks aren't being written into the marginalized communities, whether it's women of color, podcasters community, or there are many marginalized communities that could almost do with a little helping hand, the spotlight shining on them. And do you think it's an educational problem for corporate brands and sponsorship money? Or do you think it's a reluctance? Or is everything case by case? Like, where is the problem is really the question I'm driving at. Is it they just don't know that they can do this? So it's an educational bit, or is it they're not really interested in it because the return's not going to be the same? They won't be able to analyze the same metrics. And you sort of touched on analytics earlier. What are your thoughts on that?
I think it's a very complicated problem. Like you mentioned, analytics is definitely one of them. A lot of the analytics are coming from, AI software, right? That's saying shows are high risk because they use certain language. But in reality, when you listen to the content, it really isn't high risk. So that's one of the things that we are working on with a huge mosaic of other companies to try to figure out, how can we show the real metrics of these shows as far as risk when it comes to brands out there, right? Because they don't want to be associated with brands or podcasts that might hurt their brand, which was totally understandable. However, things are being demonetized when they shouldn't be, especially for marginalized communities, because of the things that we talk about, the things that we care about, the things that affect our lives. But we're just sharing an experience that really needs to be heard. So, that's one piece of it. Like you mentioned, the education piece and presenting that to these larger corporations and saying, look, there's money to be had here, and here's how it is. And another piece of that is them thinking that the market's just not big enough, and that's not the case.
Oh, it's an excellent point. Thank you for sharing that. And so, as you look forward then with this new trifecta that you're busy working on, right, with some great people behind the scenes, no doubt. If you were to shoot forward a year from now or 3 years from now, what does that look like? What does success start to look like for you and the organization?
Oh, I love this question. We really thought about what this looks like. And there are no other companies that are this type of trifecta. Not really. I think people dabble in pieces, and especially with our focus being so narrow, I think the same way you said it, I want everyone to know that Boundless Audio Network is a trifecta. It is the beacon for all women of color to come and to learn and to grow, because we're not just growing, podcasts. We're really not. That's really not our mission. Our mission is to grow and amplify voices of women. So like they are building businesses, they are building brands, and they are changing, generational wealth in their families. And that's where we see ourselves being successful, is when they start to take that hobby and they turn it into something that's going to change their lives. And more of a actual look at a year from now, we definitely want to grow the community. We want to have more in-person events. I think that's going to be really successful for us. People are missing that, in-person connection. over the last several years. And we are also growing our network. We're going to be coming out with some branded shows with some topics that are passionate to us and really start to, change the game a little bit when it comes to what does a branded show look like and, what are we putting out there and supporting. So definitely growing that piece of it, definitely growing the network.
Yeah, that's exciting times. And, I think you're already well down the road. If I know anything about the communities, I think you're well down the road to that and continued success, obviously. The other thing I wanted to ask you as well is about maybe advice, because we speak to many people in the content production side of things. We talk to a lot of creative people, and of course, people that create and produce and package podcasts and host them, and everything in between. But if you were starting out today, whether you're a woman of color, whether you are from any other walk of life, there's some sort of basics that you'd like to share maybe with our audience. Say, look, get this right first. Before you start, do this. Or is your advice just, look, just give it a go and get started? What do you think? Because when I talk to people, I get a multitude of answers to this question.
I've answered this question a lot and my answer never really changes, but yes, sometimes you really just have to do it, right? Like I think we get stuck in imposter syndrome. We get stuck behind fear. We get stuck behind this idea that it's not perfect, right? And we do just have to go. However, my real answer to this question is you really need to think about what your goal is and what success looks like. Very similar to my business. Like, what does success look like to Boundless Audio in 5 years? We know exactly what that's going to look like in 5 years. Otherwise, we're just shooting in the dark. And it's the same with the podcast. It's the same with content creation. We have all of these vanity metrics when we look at shows, like you said, like Joe Rogan. It's like, well, my show's never going to get that big. There's so many people with shows that are relatively small and they're making enough money to quit their day jobs, right? What's your goal? Is it to educate? Is it to entertain? How do you monetize this? How does this become something that could grow with you and you could do what you want to do in life? And you have to think about what success looks like for a podcast that's not only tied to download numbers, because the odds at this point to having some huge show out of the gate, unless you already have an existing audience, it's low. But with time, it really does grow. You really have to be consistent and you have to evaluate, like, is the show doing what you need it to do? Is it growing you in the right direction? And how do you package yourself as a whole brand and not just as a podcast host?
Yeah, I really like that. And I particularly like the fact that, asking people to think about what do they want it to be. You're obviously very focused on the end goal, not just for your own business, but sharing that advice. Think about where you want it to be. And also that it can be life changing, right? It doesn't have to be this huge juggernaut of a success to actually change your life if you get very specific about it. And I really like what you've shared there. Last couple of things. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with our community? We have leaders and creatives and thinkers from all corners of the world listening and watching to these shows. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience today?
Yes, I think, when we think of this idea of being a trifecta, right? It's more about a customer journey. Like we know who our people are and we know what they need, and we're providing the entire journey from start to finish. And I think a lot of people don't think about the customer journey. They think of an ideal client, they think of an ideal customer or who their content is reaching, but they don't think about what they need before that or what they're going to need after that, and connecting those dots, because not everyone's going to be at the same exact phase of their journey as people are promoting out there, which is why we've grown the way that we've grown, to make sure that we can meet all of those needs. And that's how you really build something that's sustainable. And, people that come to us will stay with us for years because they can, and they could grow with us.
Yeah, great. Thank you for sharing that. And look, last thing from me. If people want to join your community, find out more, find the shows, all these new exciting shows that you've got coming out, where is the best place to point people to connect with all things Boundless Audio, all things women of color podcasters and that community, and everything that you're involved in, Brittany? Where do you send people to these days?
Yes, definitely our website. We're boundlessaudionetwork.com. When you get there, you'll see links to join our network. You'll see links to book calls so we can handle production with you. And you could also see links to join the community. So it's really our hub that takes everyone where they need to be. And then if you want to ask me anything directly, LinkedIn is a great place to find me. I am just at Brittany Rincon, on LinkedIn. Find me. I'd love to chat with people. I love to answer questions. I'm all about not gatekeeping. I'm very transparent with, what you should do next if you have questions, and helping people and connecting people. I love to connect people to get them, to the right place. So I definitely think of this as not only a business that's, working for me, but it's also a passion of mine. I've always wanted to do this. I never thought it was going to be podcasting. And at the end of the day, it's so much more than that, while also being a perfect vehicle for kind of the social justice work I've always really wanted to do.
I love it. And it's a perfect place for us to bring this episode to a close. Thank you so much indeed to everybody who's been watching or listening to our discussion here today on the global discussion. Make sure that you like, follow, subscribe, do everything I need you to do to help support this show. And of course, go and check out everything over at Boundless Audio and everything that Brittany's doing with the team over there. And keep a close eye. There's lots of good stuff to come by the sound of it. But thank you so much indeed. I hope everybody joins me back here for some more discussions with leaders and creatives and thinkers just like Brittany. Thank you, Brittany. It's been a real pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a joy.